Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Chris and today we are going to be making and canning our own seasoned black beans. I started these black beans last night. The first thing I did was sifted through the black beans to make sure there weren't any rocks or any bad beans that got into the batch that I was going to be canning. Then last night I put 2 quarts of dried black beans into these Rubbermaid containers. The level of the black beans yesterday were here and here. Now they're all the way up here. This is a picture of what the beans looked like yesterday when I initially put them into here and covered them with water. As you can see, there are about 2 quarts of dried beans in each one of these containers. And then I did about triple the amount of water. For these 2 quarts of beans, I only needed about 6 quarts of water. Because these beans, as they soak overnight, are going to soak in that water and they're going to expand. That's why you see the black bean levels here are all the way up to about 6 quarts on each side. To get them ready to can up, we're going to need to boil these for 1 hour. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these beans and I'm going to drain them from the water that they've been soaking in all night. I'm going to rinse them real quick and then I'm going to put them in a pot with more water to boil for 1 hour. This pot is probably not going to be large enough for all of these beans. That's okay. I only want to fill it up maybe about halfway, and that's because these beans are going to continue to absorb liquid and expand. If I fill it too full, the beans are going to overflow out of the pot, and we don't want that. I'm going to take some water, fill it up. Not quite all the way, but so that there's a good couple inches of distance between where the level of the beans are and where the level of the water is. Now I'm just going to wait until the water starts to boil, and that's when my 1 hour timer is going to start. For the rest of these beans, I just grabbed another pot and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I still have this second container of beans that we'll need to do, but this is just going to soak a little bit longer because I just don't have enough space to do all of the beans at the same time. Plus, I only have 1 pressure canner and it can only hold 8 pints at a time. And I am planning to can these in pints because that's a size that we typically use these black beans in. Because I make so many at once, it's usually an all day process for me, but it doesn't have to be. And especially if you have more than 1 pressure canner, or if you have a pressure canner that can do 2 layers of pints in it, then it will go a whole lot faster for you. I don't have that. I only have a 16 quart Presto canner and it can only hold 1 layer of pints at a time. So that is all we can do at once. If for any reason you found that you run out of time and you can't process all of the beans that you prepared, that's okay. Just take the beans that were soaking, drain them, put them in the fridge, and then tomorrow or even the next day, if it takes a couple of days to get to them, it's not a big deal. Just take them out, then do the 1 hour boil and can them up. It's perfectly okay if you find out that you've taken on more than you can handle and it's going to take you a couple of days to get through it, especially because pressure canning is not a slow process. Like, it takes quite a while, and beans process for over an hour. So it does take a little while to get through them all. While these beans boil, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to prepare my jars, get them washed and cleaned up, and I'm going to get the canner ready to go too. To get the canner ready, I'm just going to fill it up with about 2 inches of water. And then I'm gonna set my clean jars inside this canner so they can get warm. I took a little bit of water that I put at the bottom of the canner and I put it in each of the jars, and that's just to weigh the jars down. If you don't put a little bit of water in the bottom of the jars, then the jars will start to float and they'll kind of move all over the place, and you risk them kind of banging into each other and breaking. I'm just going to set the lid on loosely to keep the heat in so the jars are able to heat up a little bit more efficiently. When I can, I use a hot plate for my canner, for my pressure canner, but it's not necessary to do that. I have an induction glass cooktop, and some cooktops you can on just fine. Check with the manufacturer or your owner's manual, and it should state, or the manufacturer will know whether or not you can on your glass top stove without worrying that the glass is gonna crack. However, because my particular cooktop is induction and my pressure canner is not induction friendly, it won't work on my cooktop at all. When we decided to get this cooktop, I didn't think about that at all. It did not cross my mind that we were going to end up with a lot of different pots and pans and a pressure canner that would no longer work. A lesson learned on that. So I got this hot plate, but I really actually love the hot plate because I can put it kind of wherever I need it to be, and it doesn't impede my ability to use the cooktop. If I was canning on the cooktop and say I wanted to make dinner or a lunch or something like that, then my cooktop would pretty much be out of order and I'd be out of luck. I wouldn't be able to use it because I would have this big old canner on top of it. I can link the hot plate that I use down in the description. But with that hot plate, I don't have to worry about it. I can set it off. It's right by my sink so that when I fill the canner with water, it's easy to just bring the faucet over and fill it up. When I'm done canning and I need to empty the water, I just tip it over and dump it into the sink. I don't have to worry about taking hot water across my kitchen. That's especially nice if I'm water bath canning. With pressure canning, you don't have too much water in the pot, so it's not quite as dangerous, but it's still nice just to be right next to it and just dump it over. So you see here are beans. They are not quite at a boil, but they're pretty close. And I want you to notice the white on here. So beans are very starchy, and this starch will boil up to the top, and it will start to boil over the pot if you're not careful. When I see this start to form and it's to a point where I can actually scoop it out, I just take a slotted spoon and run it across the top and kind of take some of that foam, that starchy foam, off. That way it doesn't boil over onto my cooktop or whatever surface you're heating this up on. You'll probably need to do that throughout the entire 1 hour cooking process. Just check on it, you know, every 5-10 minutes or so and see if it's got a lot of starchy buildup, and if it does, just scoop it off and you're good to go. The beans have boiled for an hour. They are ready to go into our jars to be canned. Before we put them into jars, I'm going to drain them from the liquid that they were boiling in. Now it is time to fill our jars with the beans and all the spices we're going to be adding to make them our seasoned beans. Here I have a pot of water that I just turned on the burner. This is going to get hot. We don't want boiling, but we do want it to be hot to go into our hot jars. I also got our lids washed and ready to go too. I'm going to put the jars on this towel. The seasonings I'm going to use for it, I'm going to use some salt, some dried minced onion, garlic powder, black pepper, crushed red pepper, chili powder, and some tomato powder. I'm going to start by putting 1 teaspoon of salt in each jar. Is 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, one teaspoon of chili powder, ½ teaspoon of garlic, about 1/8 teaspoon of red pepper flakes, about 1/2 teaspoon of minced onion, and then 1/2 tablespoon of tomato powder. Grab my funnel. Next, I'm going to put the beans in here, and I'm only going to fill up the jars about 2/3 of the way full with beans, because these beans, even though they've expanded while they were soaking overnight, then they expanded again while we were cooking them, they're going to expand even more after we put them in the canner. So we want to make sure to allow room for that expansion. Now we're going to fill with water until we get to 1-inch headspace. One-inch headspace is going to be right about at the bottom of this lip right here. Next, I'm just gonna kind of poke in here and make sure that there's no air bubbles in any of these. Wipe the rims off. This is really important in case you got any kind of food bits or any of the spices or anything along the rim. That can prevent the lid from sealing. When I'm putting these rings, I only want them to be finger tight. So when I turn it, the whole jar turns, but not really cranked on. Now our first batch of beans are ready to go in the canner. This time when I put my lid on, I'm gonna seal it tight so that it can heat up, start to boil, and then when it's ready, start to build pressure. First, I'm gonna turn the heat up to about medium-high. Right here is a vent that the steam is gonna start pushing through once the pressure canner heats up. This process of venting is super important because we want to make sure we get all of the air out of the pressure canner before we start to build pressure. Otherwise, the pressure is not going to read correctly inside the canner, and we're going to end up with incorrectly processed products that are potentially not safe. So that's all we can do for now for our first batch. For the second batch, I'm gonna go ahead and get my jars prepped. We have enough beans left over from what we have already cooked that will make another full canner load. So we don't have to worry about these other beans yet. We'll worry about those for our third batch of the day. So it's kind of hard to see, but our canner here is venting. It does have a steady stream of steam coming out of the vent. Since this is venting a steady stream of steam, we can go ahead and start our 10-minute timer. Timer's up. So our 10 minutes have passed. All of the air that was in this canner should be out of it by now. I use a weight to regulate my pressure. I'm going to take the weight, put it right on top of the vent, and that is going to allow the canner to start creating pressure inside of it. For my altitude, I need to can at 10 pounds pressure. So I'm going to wait until that weight starts rocking, and when it does, I'll know that we're at 10 pounds of pressure. For pints of dried beans, the processing time is 75 minutes. So as soon as it gets up to pressure, we'll start our 75-minute timer. If at any point it drops below pressure during that 75 minutes, then we have to restart from the beginning and do another 75 minutes. So it's important to keep an eye on it and make sure it doesn't drop below pressure. The weight here is rocking back and forth. So we know that the canner has come up to pressure, and we're gonna go ahead and start the timer for 75 minutes. Our first batch, if you can't hear, still going. I wanted to go ahead and get the spices into my next batch of jars just to save a little bit of time. I also wanted to note that all of these spices can be adjusted. Because they're all dry, and because we're pressure canning this, you can adjust them to be however much you want them to be. So if you want more of something or less of something, feel free to make whatever adjustment you want to make. Or if you wanted to add something, say you liked, a different herb or something like that in your beans, feel free to do that. I think one of the funnest things about doing this yourself is that you get to make those adjustments and you get to make these things exactly the way you want them to be. So the first batch that we did, we heated the jars beforehand. And I think I mentioned that wasn't necessary, but I did it anyway. This batch, I'm not going to heat the jars up beforehand. When I pour the hot water into these, it will heat the jars up so it's a little bit closer to the temperature of the water that will be inside the canner. And that will be just fine. The one time you would want to make sure to do that and not skip that step is if your jars are cold. If you have cold jars and then put them into something hot, then you risk a thermal shock. So thermal shock to the glass of the jar will break the jar. And then you'll lose the jar, you'll lose the contents in the jar and all that hard work you put into creating it. You definitely want to avoid that. And just like that, we have 8 more jars that are ready for beans and water. I have our lids here all washed and ready to go. We have our rings This next batch will be pretty quick for us to be able to get it straight into the canner. Timer just went off for the 75 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the heat off. And I'm going to let this completely depressurize all on its own. Once it's depressurized, this lock right here will drop, indicating that there's no more pressure inside the canner and it's safe to open the lid. When it depressurizes fully, what I'll do is I will take the weight off of the vent and I will let it sit for about another 10 minutes just to let more of the heat that's inside of the canner release. If you don't do that, then you have a higher chance of siphoning from your jars. And siphoning just means that some of the contents inside of it are going to be sucked outside of the jar. That not only means that you're losing some of the hard work that you put into putting those contents in the jar, it can also prevent the jars from sealing, because that might get stuck around the rim of the jar and the lid won't be able to seal. Our 10 minutes is up. I took the lid off the canner. Take a look. There they are. I'm just going to take these. That's what they look like. And I'm going to set them over here on my dining room table for the next 24 hours. I'm setting them on the dining room table because it's somewhere I can leave them and not touch them. You want to make sure that you don't touch them for at least 12 hours. 24 hours is even better, just because you need to give the jars and the contents in the jars time to completely cool. If you start messing with them, moving them, jostling them in any way, it could affect the seal of the lid. So you just want to leave them, like, set them aside and forget all about them for at least 12 hours. I don't know if you can tell in here, but the level of the water has dropped about ½ an inch. In order for that to be correct for our next batch, we're going to have to add more water. I added cold water to the canner just to bring the temperature of the water down a little bit more. It wasn't like ice cold water or anything like that, just cold tap water. That's just so the temperature of these jars and that water isn't extremely different. It'll be fairly close when I put the hot water into these jars to cover the beans. We're going to do the same thing that we did before, about 2/3 of the way full. Lid on, temperature up. Our second batch is in and ready to go. We're going to process this one exactly the same as we did the first one, waiting for the canner to heat up and start steaming. Steam it for 10 minutes, then put the weight on. Wait till it comes up to pressure, process it for 75 minutes, let it depressurize. Let it continue to cool down with this off after it's depressurized for 10 minutes, and then unload the canner and get the beans over to the dining room table with the first batch. So this might seem like a lot of work to some people, and it is kind of, and it is some work for sure. But to me, it's worth it. When I'm finished, I will have probably, I'm estimating I'll have probably about 30 jars of seasoned black beans. And that should get us through most of a year. And that means that for probably at least the next 8 months to a year, I'm not gonna have to go to the store to go buy them. I'm not gonna have to wonder if the store even has them, because sometimes they do run out. That is one thing that actually prompted me to start making my own, is because I really like to cook with these and the store kept running out. So I don't have to worry about that at all. And a little bit of work on one day, and it really isn't that much work, because most of the time you're just waiting for things to happen. You're waiting for the beans to cook. You're waiting for the canner to come up to pressure, process, and then depressurize. It doesn't take a lot of hands-on time to do any of this. So even if it does seem like a lot of work, I've been able to get so much done in the meantime. I've probably, with true hands-on time, I've probably only spent about 30 minutes or so with actual hands-on time with this. And that includes washing the jars and getting them prepped and ready to go. So it really hasn't taken all that long. It's definitely worth it not to have to go to the grocery store. I hate going to the grocery store. So, which is one reason why I really love making and preserving my own food, because then I don't have to worry about it. Not only that, but I also always have what I need on hand. I don't have to worry about whether I have beans for the dinner I want to make tonight. I just know that I always have them on the shelf. They're always ready to go, and I can just grab from my pantry and not have to make another trip to the store because I thought I had some and forgot. Nothing irritates me more than that. So, well, very few things irritate me more than that. To me, it's worth it, and I hope you give it a try too. So it's been a couple of days since we started this project. Life happened, I had other commitments, and I just didn't get it all done. It took me a total of 5 different batches to get all of the beans canned. So here we have our jars. I canned a total of 29 jars, so it was almost right on the money when I said I thought I had about 30. This is what they look like now that they're completely done. The beans rose to be about at the 1-inch headspace mark, which is exactly what we were looking for. And if you see, a lot of the liquid that was in here got absorbed by the beans. If you decide to do this yourself, or can any dried beans for that matter, it doesn't even have to be black beans, the beans will absorb a lot of the liquid that you put in there. So after they've cooled and they've sit, if you notice that there's not a lot of liquid left in here, that's okay. It's not anything to be alarmed at. It doesn't make your beans unsafe for the shelf. It's perfectly normal because those beans have soaked up the liquid. They're still processed perfectly fine and completely shelf stable. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. Please also hit the subscribe button. And if you hit the bell right next to subscribe, you'll get a notification when I upload my next video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time.